Welcome back to Spotlight Television. People are living longer, and this is expected to continue. In fact, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that the average life expectancy will increase an additional 6 years by 2060. While a longer life can influence how people think about the future, it can also add to the challenges of retirement planning and the need to create a sustainable source of lifetime income. But longevity is not the only challenge to retirement income. Market risk and inflation may also erode savings in retirement. In addition, relying on Social Security for guaranteed income may be a problem, as the program's future solvency is still in question. Taxes are another risk. With federal marginal rates on certain income as high as 40.8%, combined with state income taxes, more than 50% of income for some individuals may be subject to taxation. Yet while taxes can have a negative impact on savings, investors using a tax-efficient retirement income strategy may mitigate this effect. As always, you should consult your financial representative to determine what may be best for your individual needs, but today I have the pleasure to talk to one of the best. He is one of the country's top wealth advisors who has been helping Americans since 1972 minimize their taxes to maximize their retirement. He created the famous proprietary untaxed family wealth smiling retiree process method. He's a renowned IRMA specialist and is known for providing tax tips that even your current tax preparer may not know about. Please welcome to Spotlight Television, Navi Dowdy. Navi, how are you?
I'm fantastic.
Very good. It's a pleasure to have you on Spotlight. It's such an interesting time to talk about this topic with so much going on in the economy. But why don't you take a second and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how long you've been doing this, and tell the audience just a little bit about Navi Dowdy.
Well, I've been doing this for over 40 years, as you mentioned. I worked in corporate America for a few years after college, and then they sent me out into the field, and then after a couple of years, they wanted me to come back to the home office, and I said, you know, I've been investing in real estate, doing better, making more in that than I was working, and so I didn't want to go back to the home office, so I just started building buildings, and that's how I got into tax saving for people. I always remember I was sitting in my office with a cardiologist, and when I started building apartments, I noticed that the biggest thing that the tenants complained about was sound. So I developed this sound system between the apartments, and I had a mock-up of it sitting on my desk. And I showed this to the cardiologist, and he said, "Oh, that's great. What about the tax savings?" Next day, same thing with a orthodontist. He's there, you know, and I'm showing him my fabulous system, and he said, "Great. Does that really work?" "Yeah." "How about the tax savings?" So after a while, I finally figured out that's really all they cared about. They didn't care about my great system. All they cared about was the tax savings. So since then, everything that I do has revolved around legally and ethically, has to be legally and ethically, right in the code, saving people taxes that they don't necessarily have to pay.
Let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever seen a more challenging time when you think about today and you think about people approaching retirement, or even people, say, in that midfield, let's call it, on their way to the other end zone of retirement? Have you ever seen a more challenging time when you talk about inflation running as high as 9.2%? Certainly it's come down a little bit now, but still running way hotter than obviously the Federal Reserve would like. Federal Reserve raising rates at a pace we've never seen before in this country. People thinking about really living check to check, never mind retirement. But people who are still thinking about retirement are getting close, thinking, man, am I going to outlive my money? Have you ever seen a more challenging time for what you do than these last couple of years?
I haven't, and you're right. In fact, this is the time that I developed my process for, because, as you say, when people are nearing retirement, think of it, over 70 million people are going into retirement. If you go back to the last time we had massively rising inflation back in the 70s, the baby boomers were just starting to go to work. We were a creditor nation then, meaning that everybody owed us money. So exactly the opposite now. The baby boomers are all retiring, and we're a pretty big debtor nation now, over 30 trillion in debt. So things are completely different. We've had a long upswing in markets, you know, massively lowered interest rates since 1982, in fact. In fact, we hit the lowest interest rates in human history. a couple years ago. Think of that. So we know that that's an extreme. Interest rates are going to go up from there for certain, along with inflation. So what happened the last time we had massively rising inflation? Well, the stock and the bond market didn't do very well. The commodities, real estate, that all did well. So how do people in retirement get income? What everybody is going to do, almost in America, over $30 trillion in their retirement accounts, what they're going to do is just retire. Let's say they got $10,000 a month or 15 or 20, whatever they got every month working. The next month they're retired. What do? They call up their HR department and say, just keep sending me the same check out of my retirement account. Feels the same, but it's vastly different. They're now selling off the farm, so to speak. They're just selling their stocks, ETFs, mutual funds in their retirement account. So eventually, a lot of them will run out of money. That's the big challenge. In my process, I have 3 phases: foundation, challenges, and then the strategy. And in the challenges, you mentioned rising taxes and rising inflation. Really, it's longevity, because if you're going to die next year, it doesn't matter how bad inflation is. However, Americans, the fastest growing group is people over 100, believe it or not. I still have people in their 90s driving to the office, which I'm in the Midwest, kind of scary in the winter, but people, when we were kids, the baby boomers were kids, everybody knows somebody that retired at 65 and died a couple years later. Nowadays, you're just getting started at 65. In fact, people aren't even retiring at 65. So the challenge is, how do they fund their lifestyle? And like you said, there are lots and lots of challenges. We know now that taxes for most Americans are in the code going up January 1st, 2026. That's coming up really fast. So nobody's factoring that in, pretty much. So there's a lot of challenges coming.
Yeah. So let's take a step back, and I see we have your book, your new book, your second edition, Tax Secrets for the Smiling Retiree, and you made a point of putting with Irma on the cover, and I want to talk about Irma and all the things you do to educate people on that. But when I think about my parents when they started to save, and even when we started to save, I'm in my 50s now. There seemed to be the kind of rock steady, 401k, 403b if you were a teacher, the things. A Roth IRA, all of those things. Do you feel like the younger generation, kids who are now starting to think about savings in their 20s, early 30s, do they use the same vehicles that we used, that you used, that I used? Or is that starting to change, where it's not just a given that you go into a 401k, given some of the tax issues you will face later on in life? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my specialty is not the kids just starting to work. So my clients bring in their kids, and we talk to them, but it's automatic for most people now to put money in their 401k. When you think about what happened, we outlined this in our last movie, The Baby Boomer Dilemma, that in the 90s, the companies were able to offload their risk of their retirement pension liability and switch it to have everybody getting 401ks. Good things about that are that then you're in control of your money, whereas if you have a pension, you're not. Bad thing is now everybody in America has to become investment experts, and they can do that, but they're all experts at what they're doing in their work. Now they're expected to become experts at a whole nother field, and the risk went back to the people. So if you think about the baby boomers, parents and grandparents, what did they live on in retirement? Pretty much their pensions and Social Security. Now you're really just liquidating your retirement account. So that's the challenge.
All right, Tax Secrets for the Smiling Retiree with Irma, second edition. You made a point, I believe, of putting with Irma on the cover. I know you do a lot of seminars. You have a great YouTube channel. You give a lot of advice. There's a lot of what you do out there for free that people can go see on YouTube and your website and other places. Let's talk about why you do that, why you want to bring so much information to people as far as taxes and retiring and how to plan for that. But specifically with IRMA, because I don't think I've ever heard of it before I talked to you. So tell me, what is IRMA and why is it so important for people to understand what it is?
Almost nobody's heard of IRMA, which is really, really shocking. IRMA is simply income-related monthly adjustment amount. That's what it means, and it relates to your Medicare costs. And we say it's a secret tax. It really isn't secret. It's hidden right out in the open. The thing that's a little bit tricky about it is that when you turn on Medicare, the cost that you have for that Medicare, they look back 2 years. So imagine, typical person retires at 65. Now, granted, people are living longer now, but let's just say they retire at 65, turn on Medicare. They have to turn on Medicare when they retire. They look back 2 years. Well, what was your income 2 years ago? You certainly had a higher wages 2 years before you have in the year that you retire. So that's going to affect the IRMA tax. And we, like you point out, I spent most of my career helping people just with income tax. But IRMA, there's a lot of taxes. Let's just go back to that for a second. They tell us that Tax Freedom Day now is past the end of April. So imagine that. That's for the average person. Average person works the first third of the year just to pay their income tax, right? And all their taxes. For the people watching this, probably will be longer. Might be the end of April, end of May, even into June. And you pointed out 40%, but then there's all kinds of surcharges on top of that. So a lot of people are really hitting 50% brackets. IRMA is just another tax. If you went to buy health insurance before you retire, what would they base the cost on? Your health, right? Once you retire, however, and turn on Medicare, they don't base your cost on your health. They base it on your wealth, or we should say your income. So if you have single person more than $97,000 of income, or for married filing jointly, $194,000 of income, then you hit the first IRMA bracket. And as it is constituted right now, your costs go up 40%. Well, you can hit 5 IRMA brackets, anywhere from 40% increase to 240% increase. Now, when we talk to people about Medicare, I mean, it's, they figure it's a few $100s a month, big deal. The problem is that's growing at about double the rate of everything else, which makes sense with over 70 million baby boomers going into retirement. This tidal wave of people going into retirement need more and more and more Medicare. So if you extrapolate out what happens when people retire, they get their Social Security, then they subtract the Medicare cost. Well, the Medicare costs, if you graph it out, are going up much faster than the Social Security. The Social Security Administration has always said in the last few years that they're going to be out of money in 2033 or 2034. They collected a surplus of about $2.9 trillion, and they're spending that down now. So we think that maybe that won't happen simply because the people with more income are funding all the Medicare costs. And we run the numbers out for people. We've seen many, many people, well over $1 million in Medicare costs over their lifetime, just using the current historic inflation, let alone what's going to happen when all the baby boomers going into retirement. We see people that may be over 2 million. In fact, we see people where, just running the numbers as they set right now, they will be paying in for Medicare. That'll wipe out their Social Security, but here's the kicker. They'll still be paying tax on the Social Security that they didn't get. Here's what's even worse. We're a prosperous country, so we have the ability to have one of the spouses stay at home and not have to go to work outside the home. Well, since 1939, that spouse is entitled to half the Social Security of the working spouse. Could be husband, could be wife. You know, wife could be the brain surgeon, husband could be the brain surgeon, doesn't matter. But what we are finding out is that non-working outside the home spouse gets all of the IRMA tax. So their net check goes down really fast.
So I just want to go back for a second, because I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this who are thinking like I'm thinking, well, how do you said it's based on your last 2 years of working, and obviously you would think like anybody, I think of my wife's a teacher, her last 2 years you think are going to be her best 2 years, because obviously that's, you work on a scale, especially if you work in some industry like that. So how do you avoid, I mean, what do you do if that's the case, if it's based on your last 2 years of work, and you have to activate, like you said, at 65, what do you do?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you don't have to actually activate it at 65 if you're still working and you have insurance. So you can delay that as long as you're working and have insurance at another job. There's a big penalty, however, if you don't have that and you don't turn on Medicare at 65 or when you lose your other insurance. And of course, the companies want to encourage you to get off their Medicare or their health insurance and go on to Medicare even if you're working. So you say, what do? Well, it's not actually the last 2 years average or anything. They simply go back to 2 years before that. So if you retire at 65, they will look at your income at 63. Now, you can petition to get out of that. You can say, well, this was a one-time event and I retired. And then there's a form, SS-44 form, and you can file that and the Social Security Administration will let you out of it. The big thing that trips people up the most is when they sell an asset. We got a letter from, we can put this up if you want, from a gentleman who was in Arkansas. He was a postal worker. He retired. He got a we call it an IRMA letter. It's actually a letter from Social Security that said, this was last November, that said, we can't, based on our information we have right now, we can't pay you any more benefits, meaning Social Security. Not only that, you have to send us $1,353. Well, why was that? He retired, just a regular guy, took a bunch of money out of his retirement account to fix up his house, and that triggered an IRMA bracket. Now, he'll be able to get out of that. Where the real danger comes is if you continuously have income exceeding those two levels, 97,000 or 194,000, that's one danger. If you become single through death or divorce, that puts you in, a lower IRMA bracket. And there's a lot of pressure in Congress and the Senate to lower those brackets even further. So that's the other big risk.
So are there a lot of people who are 65 or older watching this today and running to their accountant tomorrow and saying, hey, what's this IRMA I'm hearing about, and have I been paying it, or where do I stand? Or do a lot of people are hearing this from their professionals?
In my experience, nobody's hearing this, so nobody's talking about it. I own a tax planning company, DuPage Tax Group, so I wasn't aware of IRMA. I mean, it's just another term, right? But I experienced it myself. I had a call from a client that called me up and said, hey, I just looked at my bank account and my Social Security was cut in half. What do I do? Well, she actually asked, what do you think happened? So she brought it in and we figured out she had hit an IRMA bracket because they had sold some real estate 2 years before. So that's the really tricky thing. You have to look back 2 years to do your planning. So the good news is, you talked about all the people in the 40s and their 50s, they have some time. So here's what I would say to everybody. If you're going to retire at 65, make certain that anything you're going to do to help with this is done before age 63. So people have a little bit of time. The problem is that what affects IRMA? Your wages interest, dividends, capital gains. The biggest thing, withdrawals from your retirement account or RMDs from your retirement account. All of these things affect IRMA. So really what we tell people is you should have your taxes outlined and almost done by November of every year, because then you know what you have to do. Maybe get more deductions, less deductions. The idea that everybody just pour all their money into 401ks, 403bs, that feels good because you get a tax deduction, but that's exactly the thing that in the future causes you to get tripped up in not just IRMA. IRMA is just one of it. We know tax rates are going up in the code on January 1st, 2026.
Yeah, plus I think you look at some of the funding that's just happened to the IRS. It looks like they're going to expand greatly some of the agents on the ground that are going out there to try to raise more revenue as well. So there are a lot of risks out there. So specifically, just to kind of wrap on the IRMA, obviously your book is out there, Tax Secrets for the Smiling Retiree with IRMA. Talk to me a little bit about the book and talk to me about how much of the book covers IRMA. So if people are out there hearing this for the first time, maybe they're not taking notes and they want to go back, this book might be a great resource for them to kind of catch them up on this.
It could. I just added a chapter on IRMA. It's really everything. I mean, if your viewers want, if they go to my website, they can just get a copy of my checklist, my Smiling Retiree checklist. It's 199 different tax things that can save them money. They won't all apply to anybody, but some of them will apply to everybody. Everybody has control of every line on their tax form other than their pension once they turn it on and Social Security once they turn it on. Everything else is there because they made a decision to do something, and it gets on the line. I mean, there's countless things people can do. You know, I'm going to give you just a couple of ideas. Yeah. Here's a few really simple things. If you like investing in stocks, some people I see all the time, they'll have a brokerage account outside their retirement accounts and they'll have one inside their retirement accounts. Well, in many cases, they're generating a lot of income from sales. I just saw somebody the other day, somebody was managing her account, $750,000 in the account. It was about $2.5 million in short-term sales, capital gains. So all of that affects her IRMA and all her other taxes. And then she had money in her IRA retirement account, also managed, and that had most of the growth stocks in it. So what I see all the time is people come in, they need some money, they don't take it out of the taxable bucket, they take it out of their IRA. So they have all the tax from the taxable bucket plus the retirement account withdrawals. So they're in effect creating double tax. If you just switch those around, have the growth stocks that don't produce a lot of dividends in your taxable account, all their other things where they're trading in their tax deferred, or better yet, tax free in their Roth, that's a really simple thing they can do just to save taxes. There's countless. If you had a small business, have your kids work in it. I used to own a lot of real estate, and I had these different property managers. I was walking into one of my property managers, and he's got his kids out front raking the lawn. And I asked him, "Do you pay them?" And he said, "No, I make them work, but I don't pay them." "Well, why don't you pay them? Do you ever buy them anything? You buy them toys or clothes or anything?" Well, he could pay them. It would be a deduction to his company, and it would not be taxable to the kids up to the standard deduction limit. Think of this. Not only that, he could then take some of that, put it in a Roth IRA for them. Imagine what that would grow to. And it's the only way I know of that you can have a tax-deductible Roth IRA. It's perfectly legitimate. Now, you can't just make it up. Obviously, they have to really do work, and you should record that and keep records of it, take pictures of it. But that's a perfectly legitimate expense. There's countless things. Baby boomers, over 70 million baby boomers going into retirement. How about their parents? Their parents are spending down money for medical costs and long-term care, particularly long-term care. Not much of long-term care costs, like nursing home costs, are covered by insurance. They could have bought insurance, but they're not going to buy that when they're 75 or 80 probably. So who gets the deduction? Well, the parents are entitled to the deduction, but in many cases they don't have the income to use that deduction. Just an example. Let's just say two parents in nursing homes, let's just say $100,000. Here in New York, where we're at right now, it might be more. Out in the Midwest, out in the middle of nowhere, it might be less. Let's just say $100,000. Well, that's $200,000 as a deduction. And who gets that? Most of it's wasted. It's just thrown out. Any good tax planner can show the kids how the kids can get that. Kids would be entitled to it if they set it up right. They got to jump through a few hoops, but that's they're just three tiny little tax ideas that people can use.
Speaking of other ideas, I know you write these books, like we talked a little bit about, Tax Secrets for the Smiling Retiree. You've written some other bestsellers. Tell me a little bit about why you write these books. Tell me about the reaction from people who read it and go, man, I never knew that. Why do you write these books?
Well, the first one was Tax Tips, Financial Success for the Smiling Retiree. I just took a compilation of a lot of the things I had written and sent to clients and put it in a book. But the next one that I have on the docket, I have the cover already made, and the outline is Income Secrets for the Smiling Retiree, because that's really what people need in retirement. You know, if you just have a check dropping into your checkbook every month, that's pretty good. Everybody that has pensions loves their pensions. One of the challenges with pensions is you can't stop it if let's say you win the lottery and you don't need it that year, or you can't reach in and grab, if you got to fix the roof, send me $10,000. Well, they won't do that. So that's a challenge with the pensions. But how do they get that income? That's the critical thing. And I grade income. So I say, well, here's E. What would be an E category to get income? You retire and you buy a trading course, and you think that you're going to be able to trade all of your retirement accounts. Say you have $2 million in your retirement account, and so you bought a course trading options or currency or crypto or futures, and now you're going to trade that, and that's going to be your income. Well, that might work. I actually shouldn't give it an E, I should give it a D minus, because it could work, but just remember, you're trading against professionals who that's all they do. So you're not going to just start trading and be successful at it with all your money. In fact, I had just last week a client of mine called and said his friend who did exactly that, had some option trading strategy, did great, and then lost $2 million in a month. That's what happens. It's not that those strategies don't work. The big risk is that they work too well. And so you start out with $100 and then you get sucked in, and it works and works and works and works, and then bam, you lose a huge amount. So you have to be careful of that. And then, so that would be a D minus type of income, and then I'd go up. An A type of income would be something that is automatic, you pretty certain that you're going to get it. It's going to grow with inflation. You don't have to do anything. If you want to just travel and have the dream retirement that you set out for, that would be the A type of income. And you can have other categories in between. Just simple withdrawals from your retirement account is not a very good high certainty course of income.
Yeah, and I would bet that's the majority of people what they face.
Almost everybody in America. Over $30 trillion in tax deferred retirement accounts. going to get smashed by inflation, going to get smashed by taxes. In fact, one of the reporters asked one of the Congress people a couple years ago, aren't you worried about the deficit? You know what she said? We haven't even, well, I'm not worried, we haven't even started taxing the retirement accounts yet. So that's the bullseye, is on the retirement accounts. So, which brings up a question, should people shift over to Roths? That's a logical question, right? Should you convert? We hate converting because we have to pay the tax. But I would say to everybody, keep this in mind. It's not a question of do you pay the tax or not. It's only when do you pay it. Because if you've deferred that tax into your retirement accounts, somebody's going to pay the tax, either you or your kids. And you remember a few years ago, we used to be able to stretch out for the kids' lifetime. That's gone now. So they have to pay the tax 10 years, and they can't convert it.
See, I feel like that was to my question before that I asked you about the same avenues of retiring, putting the money in the same places that we knew growing up, because I feel like now, even when you look at families who say have done really well, and they talk about maybe putting everything into a revocable trust to pass on to the kids to try to, protect their assets. God forbid the parents have to go into, whatever the future holds. But when you look at, again, you look at 401ks and these retirement things, and you're going, well, you're saving money to eventually, you're just going to have to pay the taxes on it. So the money's not working for you. And even with some family trusts, you run into those kind of issues where it just ends up being the kids who have to be the one who end up paying it.
And probably at a higher tax rate, because the parents are now in their 80s and not in many cases having huge income. The kids are right at their peak earnings when they inherit it. So they pay several taxes. They pay income tax. They may pay generation skipping tax. I just had somebody last week. Somebody had set up a trust for them thinking that, and they thought it would avoid tax because they left it to their grandkids. Well, it's generation skipping tax. You may have inheritance tax. Different states have inheritance tax. We don't think that much for most people about estate tax now because it's over $12 million exemption, but that, remember, is dropping in half January 1st, 2026, and there's a big push. We just had one of the consultants I've got said that their lobbyist called an emergency meeting a couple weeks ago and said they're telling us that they have to sunset that law, that tax law, earlier than 2026. Who knows? So we want to deal with the current law, but keep in mind what's probably coming.
Yeah.
And rising taxes is one of them.
Yeah.
In fact, here's my ultimate financial tsunami, and the top thing is taxes. Rising inflation, rising interest rates, and rising taxes.
Boy, how accurate is that right now? Rising interest rates, rising inflation, and rising taxes.
I sketched that out on a napkin sitting in a conference in New Zealand early in 2016, hoping that wouldn't be true, but certainly that's what's coming.
So let's talk about the first time people come to you. Do most people come in knowing what they're looking for, or is there a learning curve, learning process for you to say to them, you come to me, but what do you need? What do you want? What are your goals? How much of that is baked in, or how much of that do you have to really kind of force feed to new clients who come see you?
I don't see most of the people having a vision of what they want. And that, to me, that's where it starts, my process. That's the first thing. What's the vision? I always think of Alice in Wonderland. Alice comes to a fork in the road and she says, boy, I don't know where to go. Which road should I take? And the Cheshire Cat appears up in the tree and says, well, where do you want to go? And she says, I don't know. And what does the Cheshire Cat say? If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Great Yogi Berra. I have on my LinkedIn channel a bunch of quotes, and a lot of them are from Yogi. One of his great sayings was, be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there, which is a famous yogiism. So it's really the vision. What do people want? I mean, people don't, in my experience, most people I talk to don't know what they want their retirement to look like. So it's not just the money. Who are you going to be hanging around with? Where are you going to be? You want to stay in the state you're in. Everybody tells me they want to move out of Illinois because of the taxes. Well, that's may or may not be true. It seems like we're here in New York. A lot of people are moving out of New York. But where do you want to live? Who do you want to be with? What do you want to be doing? I can tell you, doing this for over 40 years, people are sometimes worried about what will they do in retirement. Everybody that I've ever talked to a year later is busier than they ever were. What they always say is, I don't know how I got everything done while I was working. And so it's the vision. What do you want? That has to dictate what do you do. How much do you need? Monetarily, some of it's important, but what do you really want your retirement to look like?
Obviously, you see a lot of clients over the years. What's your most extreme tax story that came to you that you thought, man, I'm not sure what we're going to do here?
Well, everybody's paying too much taxes. Let me give you a wild, extreme example. I gave a talk at Carnegie Hall to a bunch of business people a few years ago, and I wanted to really illustrate something. And so here's what I told them. About 400 years before that, Peter Minuet bought the island of Manhattan from the local people for $24, we're told. Seems like a really bad deal for the local people. Consider this, though. Suppose they had been able to invest that money at 8% a year all that time, over $300 trillion. And at that time, the assessor in Manhattan figured that the whole island was worth about 1.7 trillion, less than 0.5% of the total amount. So by that measurement, it would have turned out okay, unless they had been subjected to 40% tax every year. And most of the people that were there and probably watching this, if you add up all their taxes, it might be 40%. So how much would it have been worth then? Less than 3 billion. Over 300 trillion down to 3 billion. And compare that to an iconic skyscraper. The Empire State Building is worth about 1.7 trillion at the time, they estimated. So that's a description of the awesomely destructive power of taxes over time. Now, granted, most of us don't have 400 years to let our money accumulate, but still, that is an illustration of how bad taxes are. And routinely we see people paying $50,000, $60,000, just normal people, in taxes, and in many cases, again, legally and ethically, they can cut that dramatically.
Can we just talk quickly about primary residence? Is there an age that you feel like people should not be owning and going into renting, or is still owning that home and that home being such a central part of retirement, is that still the way?
Good question. I haven't thought about that from, should people just move from a tax aspect? Your home is great. Now, you do have a lot more obligations, obviously. You got to take care of it. If you rent, then you don't have control. So that's one downside. I would say this: if people are going to have to be moving into assisted care, I would do that earlier rather than later. I mean, it's shocking to hear some people still in their 90s, still at home, all by themselves. Their kids call me up and they say, Mom's still there and she left the stove on, and I mean, it's kind of frightening. So I've had many people that successfully said, I'm starting to forget, I'm not driving much anymore, I'm just going to sell my house, I'm going to move into a home. And then you have plenty of time to search one out and try and find one where if you ever have to go from assisted living into nursing home, it's automatic right within that facility or within that complex. So I mean that makes sense. But most people, it's America. We want to have our homes, right?
No, I asked those because I know there's a lot of talk now about when you think about an investment of a home investment, if it's still a good investment, like we all kind of learned growing up. You think about mortgage interest rates now where they are over 30 years and real estate taxes in some places over 30 years, what that appreciation has to look like in that house to still make it something that you can go back and go, yeah, that was a good investment. So I feel like the opinions on that are changing a little bit. That's why I asked.
Well, and in some places you can get a property tax freeze for your primary residence. I will tell you this, I used to love investing in real estate, and I built buildings. But back when I started building those apartment complexes, it cost 15% of the rent for the property tax on average. Now, most places that I've been investing, it's 30 and 40%, and I think we'll go up to 50%. I mean, every town, county, village, city, state, they're all broke, right? So they all need more tax revenue in the federal government. Where do they get it? They only have one place to get it, and that's from us. They're not going to start a restaurant, right? So they have to rate, and government expands. Governments always have expanded throughout all history. As far as I can find, I can't find a time when any government has on purpose spent less. So they always need more tax. So if you can't have a tax freeze on your home, that's a challenge. That is a challenge. Interest, however, is still deductible. Remember, they limited how much you can deduct on your itemized deduction, so most Americans can no longer itemize.
Yeah, it's assault, right?
Right.
Assault deduction.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, it's limited to 10,000. Now, supposedly, that will also disappear on January 1st, 2026, because that's supposed to revert back. So we don't know what's going to happen. But most people can't itemize your home interest, but most people in retirement are not still paying on their home interest, and if they are, it was probably from when they got a lower interest rate loan, and it's near the end of the payment cycle. So, the interest component's smaller. So, I mean, again, what's the vision? What do you want your retirement to look like? One of the things I always think about for people and talk about is an old Chinese book, Art of War, Sun Tzu, Chinese general. I'm told that most of the military academies in the world make their people read that book, or at least used to. So how does that relate to finance and people in retirement? He says lots of interesting things in there. It's really a book about how to avoid war more than about war. The thing I relate to is he says tactics before strategy is the noise before the defeat. And how that relates to what we're talking about is people will call me, some guy called me last week, should I invest in this real estate deal that somebody wanted me to? And my answer to him is always the same, or my question is always the same. Where does it fit within your strategy? And so you have to have a strategy. The tactics are the trading and all the different components, but where does it fit within your strategy?
Let's stay on talk of the government right now. We talked about inflation, you talk about taxes, you talk about the IRS, you talk about the expansion of all of it, we talk about the Federal Reserve, you look at monetary and fiscal policy. The one thing you bring up to people, especially retirees, and it'll take the smile, since the smiling retirees, what we're talking about here, off their faces, you talk about Social Security. And of course, everybody has their own reactions to Social Security. It's an entitlement, it's not an entitlement. And of course, people's fear is that it's not going to be there for them in the end. That's the ultimate fear, or it's going to somehow cease to exist or be cut. What's your feeling on Social Security moving forward?
Well, you notice they used to talk a lot about fixing entitlements, and as you just mentioned, I haven't heard that lately. The IRMA tax may be the plan to fix that, because you don't have to means test Social Security. It's already means tested by the IRMA tax. So kind of under the radar, it's hidden in plain sight. Here's what I think's coming. My ultimate financial tsunami, but I gave a talk up in Boston a couple of years ago. See if I can get this so it makes sense. And I wanted to have a visual. So here's my visual. Here's rising interest rates. If you go back to 1965, between 1965 and 1980, you had massively increasing interest rates.
Sure.
Hit the highest rate in 100 years. Stocks and bonds didn't do very well. Commodities, real estate, all those things did great. You could have bought companies in 1982 for less than the cash they had in the bank on the stock market, literally less than the cash they had, and you got the company free. Then we had this long 40-year slide in interest rates, and we hit the lowest rate in human history. Stocks and bonds skyrocketed. Commodities, other things didn't do as well as stocks and bonds. Bonds probably got to the highest price they ever would hit. In fact, last year, if you look at, I have people come in and tell me they're 60-40 in the market. So they're 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. Well, that was the worst return last year in 100 years. Why? Well, because we're now on the back side of that curve. During the rise in interest rates, stocks and bonds were terrible. During the decline, they were both good, but people were able to, anytime there was a bad spot in the economy, they were able to switch over to bonds, and as interest rates come down, bonds go up. The Federal Reserve was able to do the same thing. Bad spot in the economy, just lower the interest rates, print more money. Well, that kind of ended when we got down below 2% for 30-year Treasury bonds. And it's not going much lower. I mean, it could go a little lower, but it's certainly not going down another 16%, right, from under 2. So we're probably in that rising interest rate environment, which will be a challenge for paper assets.
Yeah, we're certainly in a higher, and we're certainly in higher for longer, it seems like the Fed wants to. We're not in Paul Volcker days, obviously, still, but even where we are now, we haven't seen it in a long time, like you said, and it looks like higher for longer is going to be the name of the game. So if you're a retiree, let's talk about that. You have higher for longer inflation, interest rates higher. You have inflation still running hot, possibly coming down to 2%. Even if that's even a legitimate goal anymore, I'm not so sure. I guess that's for the Fed to decide. But you look at our, like you said, monetary policy, fiscal policy. If you're a retiree and you're looking at possible recession, interest rates higher, certainly could be a very bad time of stagflation. That's on the table as well. Is there any other way for retirees to protect themselves going into what seems like a tumultuous next couple of years if you're around that 63, 65 years of age right now?
Well, stagflation, I think, is the right term because we don't hear that anymore. That was the late 70s. That's exactly what happened at the end of the interest rate rise. And we're kind of like that now. During that time, you rushed to buy things because you thought they were going to go up next year. So what happens then? I always think of this example. Let's say, and I'm just going to use $100. I mean, add some zeros. But let's just say you're a great investor. You got $100, and you go to the store. You see cans of soup are costing $1, so you can buy 100 cans of soup. Well, you're really good. You double your money over some time span, and you're really proud of it, but you go to the store and you see now soup costs $2 a can. Well, you can still only buy 100 cans of soup, except the IRS comes along and says, hold on, you had a flow of wealth there. You made some money. We want our cut. So let's say they just take 20%. So now you've got $180, but soup now costs $2 a can. Now you can only buy 90 cans of soup. So you did really good, you doubled your money, and yet you slid backwards. That's stagflation. And what else happened back then was people went into higher wages, got into a higher tax bracket, and still couldn't buy anymore. So that, I mean, I don't know if that's coming. My specialty is not predicting the future. I mean, you can turn on any television show on any business channel, constantly got people on there predicting the future. What I think we should do is those people that you're talking about nearing or in retirement should just make another decision about how do they allocate their money. I mean, it just logically, you would say how you gained that money isn't necessarily the best way to preserve it and distribute it. We always use the example of people climbing Mount Everest. You got to the top, well, now how do you get down? Interestingly, most of the deaths coming down Mount Everest are on the way down, not going up.
How should people pick who's going to plan for them? What do they look for? What goes into that decision? What should go into that decision for most families?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? How do you pick somebody to help you? Well, first, let's just go through the list. You could do it yourself. Like I said, people retire and then they want to, they buy a trading system, but they can do it themselves. Some people are really good at that. And if you can do it yourself, just keep doing it. I would say this, if you're going to do that, just remember, don't try and day trade. That's the time span of the market makers. That's what they're expert in. So I think that's a tough way to do it. But you can certainly hire somebody to help. You can hire money managers. So you can, how do you pick? Well, the people should have these criteria. The people you're going to pick, they should be fiduciaries, number one. They should have a unique process that makes sense to you. So they should be able to explain their process, like my Ultimate Financial Tsunami process or my Smiling Retiree process on tax family wealth process, those types of things. And then, we can explain that to people. It will make sense. Should have a unique process. Income calibration process, things like that are different than everybody else. So you should never, here's some ways, where I say, well, how do you know somebody's not Bernie Madoff, right? That's a big question. Well, for one thing, you should make certain that you never write a check to an individual. Your check should always go to some large independent national custodian. You can all the names, where you can go independently and look and make sure your money's there. Bernie was his own custodian. You need to have independent reporting from that custodian. They should be, the trades, if you're trading, should come from that other custodian. You should get statements from them. Now, you may get statements from your person also, but you want to make sure you get statements from that independent, nationally recognized company that they're using, so you know that your money's there and it's not in somebody else's pocket. I talked about income grading from A to D minus. They should have some process like that. They should have some experience. So typically, most people out there have spent their entire life in the growth mode. And one of the things we have as a problem as human beings is we take shortcuts, right? If you have teenagers, you told your teenagers, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Or, don't keep doing the same thing if it's not working for you. One of the problems with retirement planning is that what everybody's been doing feels like it's working, because they've just worked and the money's been taken out of their account, put in their 401k, and they've got this big pile of money. But when you retire, it's entirely different. What happens when you retire? You stop putting new money in the market. Your employer stops matching that money. You stop putting new money in Social Security and Medicare. Your employer stops matching that. And not only that, you turn around and start taking it out. That's a vastly different thing than putting it in. In fact, when you're putting money in your 401k in the beginning, you get to use just a mathematical thing called dollar cost averaging. The market goes down, or whatever you're investing in goes down, let's say the week after you put your first payment in, drops in half. you buy twice as many shares. And on average, you end up with a lower average cost per share. What nobody tells you is that when you retire and you start taking it out, that also works, and you end up with a lower average cost per share, and your account spirals down faster. And people will quote to you all the averages. You know, the market's been 9% over the last 120 years. Well, there's some big assumptions there. Number one, you just put that money in 120 years ago, never touched it, which is never the case, right? No, you didn't add to it, you didn't take anything out. Number two, you changed every time that a company changed, like if you use an index like the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones 30 Industrial Index. I don't think anything is in the Dow now that was there 100 years ago. So you would have had to have changed with that.
What's your most important point that you want to leave with the audience today on everything we've discussed? What's the most important point you want them to know? And then I also want you to let people know how they can get in touch with you, find out more about what you do, find out about your books. And I know you do a lot of traveling, you do a lot of speaking, seminars on the road. Give everybody where they can get in touch with you as well.
NavyDowdy.com. You can go there, you can go to, just type my name into YouTube. You can look, I've got probably 200 tax tips on there. Call my office, 630-893-4142. It's on all my books. You have to change your strategy when you go into retirement. Now, the billionaires, it doesn't matter. But for the vast majority of Americans, it's vitally important. You asked about how do we pick somebody to work with. I missed this, probably most important thing of all. Make sure that the people you're working with know about taxes. Don't let somebody tell you that the phrase, don't let the tax tail wag the dog. The taxes are the dog. They're the big dog. Taxes and inflation are going to eat everything up if you don't deal with it. So just make sure who you're working with knows about taxes, has experience in distribution and preservation of your money. That's the most critical thing once you get into retirement. You have to have the income. That's the biggest thing I would say. You know, if you think about what can you do with your money, you can put it in stocks, bonds, real estate, cash, or commodities. That's it. All the financial products are just some combination of those, and they can only do 5 things for you. They can give you growth, they can give you income, they can give you tax benefits, they can give you liquidity, or they can give you some level of protection or not. That's all there is. What do you want? Well, when you're 25, you want growth. But what do you want and what do you need when you're nearing retirement? And I would also say this, whoever you're working with should be able to answer these 4 questions or figure out for you, or you should be able to do it for yourself. How much do you have to earn on your pot of money to have the lifestyle you want in retirement? How much longer do you have to work? Or in other words, when can I retire? Based on how I'm set up right now. How much more money, if any, do I have to put in to my pot of money? And lastly, how much longer do I have to work? And lastly, how much do I have to lower my standard of living if none of the other things work? Those are the 4 fundamental questions. And when I meet with people, nobody knows the answer to that. Those are the things you have to know that. I mean, how can somebody tell you what to put your money in if they don't know how much you have to earn? Suppose we did that analysis and it came out and it said, you got to earn 1% on your money. You would invest it much different, or at least you could invest it much different than if the answer was I've got to earn 15.
Right.
I mean, let's say it's 1%. Let's just say you got a lot of money and you're not spending that much. It's 1%. Then there's 2 extremes. On the one hand, you could say one extreme would be I've got enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. What's the difference if I lose half of it? The other extreme would be, I've got enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Why would I take any risk at all? For most people, it's going to fall someplace in between there, but that's what I would leave people with. Get with somebody who can figure that out for you. And then also somebody that doesn't just have one answer. And I always think of this analogy. You live on a street, on the left of you is the general practitioner doctor. He's smart, knows a lot of stuff about, a little bit about a lot of different things. And if you just have a cold, you go to him. On the other side of you is the world's best heart surgeon operating on one valve. And if you need that operation, everybody in the world sends their people to him. But if you got a sore knee, he says, I don't know anything about bones. I'm a heart surgeon. And then so they're both specialists, but across the street you have a cardiologist. Cardiologist is a specialist in a system, your cardiovascular system. You don't want a cardiologist that when you walk in the office says, hey, we've got a sale on, these statin drugs this week or stents or something. No, a good one will work on whatever is necessary to make your cardiovascular system work. That's who you want to be working with. Somebody that will work on the retirement, their specialty in retirement, not a specialty in stocks or mutual funds or ETFs or life insurance or annuities, or they need to be a level up from that. If you had $50 million or more, you probably have your own office with people employed to take care of everything, CPAs and tax attorneys and so on. For people that don't have that much money, what I did was I started my own, what's in effect a virtual family office, my Untaxed Family Wealth company. And what that does is tries to take the techniques that we use for people that have got $30-40 million and bring them down to the normal people that don't have that much money. Because everybody says the rich don't pay taxes. Well, the truth is the rich do pay less taxes because they hire people to make sure that they're not paying excess tax. And so that's what my Untaxed Family Wealth family office does for people. Our mission is to try and save America's retirement accounts. And that's one of the ways to do it. Less tax, better life. Less tax, better retirement.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Again, NavyDowdy.com online is one place to go. I know your YouTube, but again, you can check out your books. Your books are available on Amazon. Books are available wherever books are sold.
Get on your favorite online bookseller.
All right, very good. Navy Dowdy, it's been great to have you here. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on Spotlight Television.
Glad to be here.
And I want to thank you for watching. Again, NavyDowdy.com will link to all Navy sites, YouTube, books as well. I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Spotlight Television.